This is one of those discoveries that's going to be hard to believe, especially with my use of Claude, but I'll do my best to show you the math and the story that unifies physics while making more sense. It fills in the gaps by finding the texture of hidden energy that fills all empty spaces, showing subtle properties of boundaries from the atom to the cosmos. Just over a year ago, from this image, I saw the pattern of boundary layers under stress in a supercharged superfluid. I believe that instead of an empty vacuum and empty atoms, particles are closely packed vortices rotating at the speed of light. And there's one little particle we miss that fills the vacuum and all empty spaces in between atoms. Let me try to show you what this looks like, starting with the vortices in Jupiter. If you look carefully, you can see the thin layers that surround each turbulent region. These are shear zones with opposite rotating vortices. Keep these structures more coherent than pure diffusion. In a superfluid, vortices are made from many vortex lines, and each chain of particles is moving too fast to be seen as individuals. In the shear zone, the lines twist into eddies and they form a small gear in between the two larger ones that holds that boundary together. So imagine a substrate that behaves like Jupiter but has no friction, and the vortices rotate 2 million times faster at the speed of light. They tighten into a persistent knot as a closely packed superfluid condensate. The picture on the left shows the texture. The middle view shows the texture of anti-phase pairing, two oscillating vortices locked in each other's wake. And on the right, it shows the computed texture for DC1, nicknamed dark carbon, the hidden elemental vortex that sits between spaces. And here's the computed texture for DC1, transmitting the photon with coherence, the elastic energy allowing one vortex envelope to move inside another. From the idea of vortices rotating at the speed of light, the math falls out. Here are some highlights of predictions on lightfluid.org. A near perfect match to explain the missing energy of the vacuum. The ratio of the muon's mass to the electron, why a fold causes that exact large increase, why the iron nucleus is the strongest. It closes mysteries in the cosmos, explaining dark matter, black holes, how the universe began, and the major puzzles today where physics struggles. Here are key equations based on one new particle, DC1, and one tuned parameter, the number of DC1 cells and one effective quantum. The speed of light is plainly the rotational velocity of the vortices. And the energy for mass in the famous E equals mc squared comes from the vortex velocity squared, the theoretical limit of the stored energy, but it's only breakable in an unstable nucleus. And the quantum potential is the reaction force between the tightly wound shear zones surrounding the electron, a fluid reason why the electron does not collapse into the nucleus, and a clear explanation for puzzles left behind by the unexplained variable Q. And the lattice size, the width of a human hair, comes from both cosmology and particle physics, using the modons Bessel function with Planck's constant and a Compton wavelength, and other standard values. That result is supported by the vortex density, the packing fraction, and a geometric number using superfluid first principles. So if you could zoom in, you would see many vortex lines, too many to count, oscillating and bouncing off the vortex core and then off the envelope that forms around this leaking mass energy. And the envelope forms at a distance to contain the leaking mass. So smaller envelopes form around heavier leaks and lighter ones around, larger ones around lighter leaks. And in the vacuum and all spaces in between things, the antiphase oscillation of DC1 vortex pairs adds even more mass as they are held together by counter-rotating eddies that balance the two leaking mass things in opposition to hold the energy. And they appear massless inside the larger envelope that catches most of the remaining leak. Zooming out, each lattice cell's remaining leaks are held in this honeycomb, another invisible boundary. So together, this highly energetic, efficient, elastic glue transmits light without energy loss, and it holds the space in between and explains the substrate that underlies everything. To round out the particle landscape, the proton is a knot of 3 quark vortices that are interlocked, and the other particles are balanced with oppositional vortex energy that cancels, like the prime example is the photon. And the photon is a modon, a dipole vortex with 2 counter-rotating vortices in an envelope that evects masslessly, so they're canceling opposite momentum. And each rotates in the other's velocity field, and they move at the signal speed. So the modon holds varying energy inside. It needs matching oppositional energy to absorb or break it up. And these are all the properties a photon must have. And one photon forms when the 2 counter-rotating layers of an orbital break free into 2 counter-rotating vortices. And then later, an atom, with a similar counter-rotating orbital will catch that photon and turn it back into a larger orbital. Here's why the substrate is so hard to see. Each modon moves through the substrate like a tiny boat with a big wake that fills up a harbor, and one big envelope from its small leaking mass. It moves seamlessly through the substrate with lots of other big envelopes. But you can't peer into it without changing the weather for a boat. And even like larger wavelengths are just these dispersed, paired winding energy layers. And the shear zones also explain gravity. They let almost nothing through, but each leak falls with acceleration to the next boundary. So the math that predicts space is warped by gravity, and the time is dilated by gravity and speed. Those are just pressure effects in the substrate. And black holes create fast rivers of gravity that hold back all light from the inside. And they emit this smooth aura of photons from the boundary layer. They're like modon photons squoze out with this mechanical process with no spectral lines, not because they destroyed anything. So this means our universe did not emerge from a point and expand from everywhere all at once. It nucleated and exploded, cascading black holes that popped together after the last universe wound down. And this massive event erased the origin from the inside, expanding as vortices, like mixes of matter and antimatter that almost immediately all turned into small modons, one antimatter gobbled up by one matter vortex until there was only matter left. And the matter from the previous bubble tips the scales to avoid the antimatter universe. And quarks roll up enough background vortices so that 3 lock into a lower energy proton state, and at the same time they spit out this electron that conserves the charge and winding. So at some point, the expanding bubble has to merge with the moraine crust left over from the previous one, and that creates the ripples of dark matter density and more dispersion than we expect. This explains the microwave background and its faint tilt and how much the universe stretched and just falls out of the backbone equations. And both the tensions about energy growth and matter dispersion are reduced. All the dark matter observations make sense. And even the interstellar visitors that arrive on the orbital plane, they're following the substrate fluid. So also the visible vacuum energy is predicted by our equations as 120 magnitudes order like higher, and this explains why it's invisible. So switching from the cosmos to the texture of the lattice and boundary layers, like the lattice has a spacing as well as an envelope size, and that includes the layering of oppositional energy in between. So 16 and 8 micrometers form opposite energy pathways between the sheets of the lattice, and then the antiphase vortices are separated by the square root of 2. So this gives the lattice like 2 textures, one in the plane and one, but it's really one factor and one ratio. And so The lattice becomes this lightweight scaffolding of energy in between layers that chemistry can use to lock onto, hinge, or avoid. And that's a scale invariant energy pattern that it's a texture that helps shape the boundaries. And the ratio shows up clearly in some cases, like the structures in the ear and the frequencies of the brain locking directly onto the pattern, either the square root of 2 or the angle is 120 degrees. And the hinge ratio allows symmetry, kind of on-off switches like the brain uses for spatial recognition. And the anti-lock ratio is the golden angle that the substrate uses to avoid. So the substrate has this endless energy that has to circulate, the energy that underlies it all. And the flow pattern creates a canonical feedback loop with two topologies, just like the two types of particles. Like one is balanced and the other is unbalanced. And the unbalanced uses the feedback topology with a common structure. There's energy in the angular momentum, commonly in the orbital plane, or aggregated as nested modons, and the input-output jets to stabilize it along the axis. They're like emitted vortex lines to burn off energy from the momentum plane, or to speed it up by pulling it in. And they basically connect the whole thing with this canonical loop. And then the second topology is the balanced one, the modon topology, which is like the stable wraps, like the photon, which can be moving or stationary. So if you combine the lattice's scale invariant ratios, the repeating lock, anti-lock hinge choice for chemistry, and the modon topology, together they form the stable long vector where chemistry holds and transmits information using the modon topology, and the feedback topology regulates systems with the canonical loop. So the topological modons explain cellular dynamics as more than just chaos and diffusion. It's like the energetic glue that helps chemistry split photons and store the resulting energy, and shielded double-wrap mitochondria, and that shows the modon structure of DNA, how it ties into the feedback loop with its polar axis and signaling channel. And as a bonus, the mutual friction parameters from the backbone equations explain the anomalies of DNA's tilt and the microtubule formation where the weak substrate energy actually shifts the balance that chemistry prefers. So the photon as a modon explains why crystals refract, and the same antiphase pairing of DC1 shows why certain metals conduct but don't superconduct. And then lightning shows free electrons moving past the interrotational speed, shedding these like gamma modons mechanically with like no spectral lines, just like the black hole radiation bubbling. And a similar phenomena, sonoluminescence, where inside one lattice cell, bubble pops and moves fast enough that it emits light as a pure spectrum frequency, and it's all explained well by the substrate. Water shows the most diverse interactions with the substrate due to its geometry and how it mixes with the lattice's ratios, like ice locking on to the lattice as it freezes in hexagonal form with the 120 degree angles expanding in this unusual way, and then snowflakes forming also with the hexagonal pattern. And then the peak detonation speeds of explosive materials cluster right at the substrate's like shear speed. So each of Earth's major circulation patterns use these modon topologies both in the air and internally. And soil shows the lattice scales, explains fairy circles with the 120 degree angles again. So in this picture, the Earth evolved by adding new layers of substrate nesting, each with a canonical loop that holds up the next. And the iron core is a standing modon that sheds the magnetic field that props up the atmosphere. And the moon and Earth form these like balanced modon topologies that help like circulate the energy of the Earth, keep all the layers moving. The long vector with two topologies shows like a clear picture of perception for the brain, how memories are stored, the yin-yang dynamic, and in particular, your personal grand stage for the coherence match is just the dance between the two hemispheres of the brain in the flow state. And from the feedback topology, the body has an aura, an opposite mirror that you give off and can potentially sense even before you've been touched. So this is the long vector that you feel, of the coherence match. I'm not an expert on any of these fields, but have tried to curate a deeper dive on this exploration. And what I see is the math contains essential satisfying equations, and the predictions are deep, and the story holds both the atom and the universe together with the coherence. It's just like a missing boundary layer should. So there's both a story and a paper that covers this all in more detail on lightflow.org. Paper includes Python programs that reproduce the numbers. I hope I sparked a little curiosity about the substrate that underlies our fluid universe. And thanks for watching.